Now, the IMF has, in recent years, been very vocal about its commitment to low-income countries. You spoke about the loans being doubled at zero-rate interests until 2011. Now, does this mean that the IMF is confident that the African continent will have recovered from both external and the internal shocks that we've seen, particularly in the last 2 years?
Well, probably for a large number of them, they will have recovered enough. Another reason is that to be able to lend at a zero interest rate, we need to have subsidies to compensate for the interest rate. And yet, we have accumulated this amount of resources which make us able to do this until the end of 2011. It doesn't mean that it will stop. We may find other resources and go further if necessary, but at least these zero interest rate will go on until the end of 2011, which is a big change compared to what has been done in the past or what could be done by other institutions.
Now, with that in mind, what has IMF's contribution been to the Kenyan economy and the wider African continent so far?
Well, you know, we had 1 year ago a very important conference in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where we tried to set up the basis, the foundation of a new role for the IMF, taking into account what has been done in the past, what was good, what was bad, listening from our African partners, the criticism they may have, and they had a lot. Some were fair, some may be challenged, and we decided together to build a new relationship between the IMF and Africa. 1 year later, it delivers. A new kind of a financial facility have been created, new kind of relationship, new training centers are going to be open in Africa. So on each field of our activity, our engagement with African countries has improved, and I think that African governments all across the continent realize this and acknowledge this.
Now, one of the concerns that we picked up during the debate in Nairobi was the fact that several of the panelists, especially of African origin, felt that there's not a strong voice within the IMF to speak for the African issues. What is your response to that?
We already made a reform in 2008, which takes time to be implemented, partly because governments, not only in Africa, but also in Africa, say they agreed with the reform, but they are delaying the moment they will go to the parliament to approve it because they have other stuff to do, which I can understand. But so far, the reform which has been done in 2008 and was in the interest of Africa has not been implemented. I think it will be rather soon. And then we have a new step, a new round of increasing the voice of low-income countries and emerging countries, which is supposed to be completed by the end of this year. But you know, representation is not only a question of quota, voice, shares, it's also a question of diversity of the staff, how many Africans really work in the IMF. And from this point of view, I'm very interested in developing the numbers of people coming from the different part of the world. It's true also for Latin America as well as for Africa, who are going to work in the institution, providing the institution with some different view from the world than the more traditional view that the IMF could have in the past.
Now, there seems to be a strong call for Africans to look within the African continent for solutions to their own problems. What's your take on that?
You still have a lot to do, let's be candid. Sometimes to go from one city to another city in Africa, it's worthful. Go to Europe, fly to Europe and come back because it's difficult to travel. Or even if you travel by road, when you're traveling from Nigeria to Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, you will be stopped on the road every other 10 kilometers by controls and things like this, which all kind of things which make it difficult to have trade and to develop the economic activity. So a lot of things can be done in just making this smoother and making trade more easier.
Another issue is China's involvement with Africa. The IMF has been quoted before saying China could lead the global economy out of the recession and into better times for the economies, keeping in mind the continual presence of China on the African continent. What impact is this likely to have on the growth of the African region?
Well, China, as you say, is taking more and more room in the Africa economics, which is good. Still, the share of China is small, but increasing very rapidly. And there is no reason why the African will refuse this help or investments coming from China. The only point is that when a country, an African country, is discussing with China, you have a huge country discussing with a generally much smaller country. So we have to take care that the relationship are fair enough. And that may be the role of the IMF to help African countries to deal with the Chinese. We did it in DRC, for instance, to make sure that the deal done on mining will be certainly beneficial for the Chinese, if not they won't do it, but also beneficial for the people of DRC. And if you take care to do this kind of thing, to have a real balanced agreement, then certainly the Chinese are welcome investing in Africa.
Against that background, what's the IMF's outlook for the Kenyan economy? In October 2009, you were quoted as saying the Kenyan government is likely to grow by 4% in 2010. Keeping in mind the current both economic and political scene that we're seeing, are you still holding on to that 4% projected growth for 2010?
Well, there have been some problems in Kenya, as you know, on the political side, some difficult problems, and of course it hasn't helped. It hasn't helped for the Kenyan economy itself, but also it hasn't helped facing the rest of the world and the foreign direct investment, for instance, because the capital is keen investing in Africa, and Kenya, from this point of view, is a very interesting, promising country. But capital flows go where they feel that the situation is safe. And for political reason, the situation didn't appear so safe in Kenya. I think that something between 3 and 3.5% is probably what we can expect. You know, forecast is a difficult exercise.